Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying up to 10 years in prison. But now, in a twist maybe no one saw coming, reports say President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Diddy's lawyers about a possible presidential pardon. Could Trump really set Diddy free?
The shift didn't happen slowly. It didn't ease in. It hit all at once. One official confirmation and an entire life trajectory snapped into a different direction. What had been paused was suddenly active again. What had been contained was now loose in the world.
Criminal trial, 7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges. Could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you, in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion. He said when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show, The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who was being mistreated, not Puff Daddy. And let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon. And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately?
And the moment it became official, there was no going back to speculation. Reality took over. A sudden turn doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like paperwork being finalized, doors being unlocked, a routine process executed without emotion. But the consequences of that moment ripple outward fast. faster than anyone can control. For a long time, the story lived in limbo, not finished, not resolved, just suspended. People filled that space with assumptions, theories, anger, hope, and everything in between. Limbo allowed distance. Confirmation erased it. Once release was officially acknowledged, distance collapsed instantly. This wasn't just a change in legal status, it was a forced confrontation with the past, with public memory, with unfinished conversations that never really went away, just quieted down for a while. The sudden turn came with no soundtrack, but the noise followed immediately. Online spaces flooded with reaction. Some people celebrated the idea of an ending. Others rejected the idea that an ending had been earned.
It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account. Milo posted on X, Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce. Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there was a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur pornography. And then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across, or men getting them across state lines. None of that was being done. This was all being done for entertainment purposes. So it's an interesting argument. I don't think this judge buys it. It might be interesting on an appeal, but I don't think the judge is going to give him a judgment of acquittal on those two counts based on the argument. Now, the more interesting argument to me, and it's their last argument for new trial, is that, listen, if you were just going to charge him with these two counts, which I originally said when I looked at all the evidence, and don't forget, I was getting calls during this trial from individuals that were telling me, hey.
And many just stared at their screens, unsure how to feel because nothing about this moment felt clean. What makes a release feel sudden isn't the timeline, it's the emotional whiplash. One day the story feels frozen, the next day it's moving again at full speed, and movement demands interpretation. Some saw the confirmation as inevitable. They believed the system would always reach this point. That time would pass, conditions would be met, and the result would arrive regardless of public pressure. For them, the sudden turn wasn't shocking. It was confirmation of a belief they already held. Others saw it as a rupture, a break between what they expected and what they wanted. To them, the release felt premature, unresolved, or deeply uncomfortable, not because of legality, but because of emotion, because emotional closure doesn't operate on schedules. And then there were those who felt conflicted in a way they couldn't easily explain. Relief mixed with resentment, curiosity mixed with fatigue, a sense that something important had shifted, even if they couldn't articulate what that something was. The official confirmation carried authority. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't inside.
Hey, I have information that exonerates what they're saying against Sean Combs, essentially saying that Cassie and others were participating more than just having sex in a room. They were participating more than that. They were paying people. They were hiring people. They were sending me pictures even when Diddy wasn't around. They were asking me to come over even when Diddy wasn't around. These were what these witnesses were telling me, which is really Brady evidence. And I don't know if that was ever turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts. And he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking. And I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that. Not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution? It always felt to me that they proved that charge based purely on, the documents.
Well, I always feel like during a trial, whenever you get a guilty verdict on one of the counts or two of the counts out of 6 or 7, you think to yourself, is it because of these other things that they brought up? How bad he is, he's not a good guy, the video came out. Sometimes juries will split the baby, meaning, there's people that want to convict, there's people that don't want to convict, and they're like, okay, let's convict him on these acts. We can all agree we can convict him on these acts. He's not a good guy. He transported these men across state lines. Let's convict him on this. There's always going to be a question of that. The only way to not have a question of that, obviously, is when the jury comes out, someone gives an interview and says, hey, this is why we did it, is because, this tape was so bad and these other incidents were so bad that we were like, we can't just let him walk with nothing. So we convicted him on the Mann Acts. Now, we don't have a juror saying that. Do I think eventually jurors are going to start coming out? Yeah, I think so. I think some of these jurors are going to come out. They're going to want to do some interviews, not before sentencing. And I think after sentencing, I think some of them will come out and we'll discuss it, because I think that was the feeling I was getting from this jury and the reactions they had to Comey's closing, and even the reaction just in general to the 5 or the 6 U.S. attorney team. I think their reactions in general were very noticeable, and I think that this is a jury that wants to talk to people once I think he gets sentenced.
Okay, so now let's move on to the pardon discussion. So if he can't get relief from the court in getting the conviction thrown out or a new trial, can he get relief through a pardon? Before we talk about, is this a real thing, what is the process to even obtain a federal pardon? How do you even go about that?
Sure. So it's a pardon or a commutation. If someone is actually in custody, they could also get a commutation, which does not wipe the crime off your record. It just allows you to get out of jail. So he has that option to give him a commutation. If he gets sentenced, he can also give him a commutation. But as for the process, there's an application on the DOJ website, and I'm part of some charities that also do a lot of pro bono work for pardons and commutations. You can fill out this form, DOJ website. It essentially lists the reasons why you should get a pardon, what kind of community service you've done, things of that nature. There's a separate application for a commutation, but you can file a pardon application, and you could also say, hey, listen, if it's not a pardon, I'm looking for a commutation. You attach your indictment, you would reasons why you feel your crime.
Whispers. It wasn't speculation. It was final in the only way institutions know how to be final, and that finality forced everyone to move forward, even if they weren't ready. The sudden turn also reframed the entire narrative. When someone is confined, the story is contained, limited, controlled by walls and rules. Once those limits are removed, the story expands. Every future move becomes part of the narrative. Every decision becomes a signal. Freedom, in this context, isn't an escape from attention, it's an invitation to more of it. The spotlight doesn't shut off when the door opens, it gets brighter. The confirmation didn't answer questions, it multiplied them. What happens next? How does someone re-enter a world that hasn't stopped watching? How does a public figure exist in a space where every action is interpreted through a lens of history? Because history doesn't stay behind. It doesn't dissolve when paperwork is signed. It walks out too, clinging tightly, reminding everyone that time passed, but memory didn't.
Was you were unfairly prejudiced or unfairly convicted. All of those things go into the packet. I always try to help people that are filling it out on their own to show them, what to point out. Those type of cases are always heartening because those people deserve pardons. They deserve commutations if they're in, and it's some sort of crazy drug offense that was brought up in the 90s. All of those things are reasons for pardons and commutations.
So is this real? I mean, here's the thing. He is in a much better position to get a pardon or a commutation of his sentence because he wasn't convicted of sex trafficking and racketeering. There is a way to justify this based on some of the arguments I just mentioned that his defense team is making, that maybe he shouldn't have been brought up on this. The I-Man Act, not as serious as what he's facing. Is this real? Do you think that this is going to happen? That he's going to get a pardon or a commutation from President Trump?
I don't know if he's going to get one. I do think that it's real because, like I said before, President Trump, whether they like him, don't like him, if he feels something is wrong, and we've seen this happen before in the past, if he feels something is wrong, someone got railroaded, someone was convicted, wrongfully, he will take a look at that. Yeah, Sean Combs has said things in the past that probably were not great. I've read them, but I think that if anyone understands that, I mean, look at President Trump's cabinet. There's individuals on his cabinet. His vice president has said things in the past that weren't great for him. But he understands that people evolve, people change their minds. People understand that there's certain requirements, things that are going on, certain pressures that they're under. And I don't think that would affect whether or not he would grant a pardon or commutation based on things that were said in the past. I think it would be based on what he gets sentenced to, or based on the facts of the Mann Act, that the Mann Act itself, I think, is unconstitutional. I think there's issues the way that it was applied in this case.
But from an optics point of view, I don't know, moral point of view, what about everything that came out of trial? The texts, the bruises, the Intercontinental tape. It's not like you can say Diddy is totally clean, that he's a complete angel. Yes, he was acquitted of the most serious charges, but the evidence that came out during the course of the trial, wouldn't it be difficult for the president to justify maybe pardoning Diddy? Maybe it is a commutation. Maybe it is, if he gets 5 years, he says, okay, I'm commuting it down to 2 or 2.5. I don't know how it would work, but that's the part that I think people might be struggling with, and what you heard, I think, from Megyn Kelly.
And even his own lawyers, no one was coming out here saying that Sean Combs is an angel, that Sean Combs doesn't do anything that is off the wall, crazy. These things, no one is claiming that. And in fact, even during my interviews, when I was saying things that weren't so popular, saying like, listen, he's only going to get convicted of these Mann Acts, I don't think he's going to get convicted of anything. And people were attacking me and saying like, oh, you like, abusers. That's not the point here. The point is to look at the law, apply the law fairly, apply the facts to the law. That's what's important here. And that's what I was doing when I was looking at the case. Looking at this from that standpoint, he's going to have been in for about 15 or 16 months by the time he gets sentenced. It's not like he got a freebie. If he got a misdemeanor battery, he would have served 364 days in jail. If he got a couple charges, maybe he would have served 2 years in jail. If this judge decides to give him 4 or 5 years based on this, do I think that's unfair? Yes. Do I think President Trump would look at that and say this needs to be communed to time served, or communed down to 18 months because he is 15 months in? I think so. I think that would be the fair thing to do. Whether or not he does it, I have no idea. I mean, I don't think President Trump does things because
The sudden turn also exposed how fragile public patience really is. People want accountability, but they also want resolution. They want consequences, but they also want closure. And when they don't get both at the same time, frustration spills over. Some people framed the release as proof of systemic imbalance. Others framed it as proof that the system functioned exactly as designed. Those two interpretations collided immediately, creating a familiar, exhausting argument that never really ends. But beneath that argument is a quieter discomfort, the realization that justice isn't a feeling, it's a process, and processes don't care whether people feel satisfied when they end. The sudden turn forced everyone to confront that gap, the gap between what is legal and what feels right, between completion and healing, between official language and lived impact. Silence played a powerful role here, no dramatic statements, no immediate attempts to reshape the narrative.
Community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. I mean, they had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they would say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago. But how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, Does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on
just confirmation, then quiet, and silence is rarely neutral. It becomes a canvas for projection. Some projected remorse, others projected defiance, others projected strategy. The absence of information allowed imagination to run wild, and imagination is rarely generous. What makes this turn especially sharp is that it didn't arrive with clarity. There was no collective agreement on what it meant, no shared understanding, just fragmented reactions, each rooted in personal values, experiences, and biases. The release didn't erase the past, it didn't validate it either, it just changed the setting. The story moved from confined space to open terrain, where control becomes harder and scrutiny becomes constant. Every step forward now carries weight, every appearance, or lack of appearance, will be dissected. Is it avoidance? Is it reflection? Is it calculation? There is no neutral interpretation when the public is watching closely. The sudden turn also challenges the idea of redemption. People argue endlessly about whether redemption is possible, who deserves it, and what it should look like. But redemption isn't something that can be
release. It's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we've talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. They were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes and the travel, hotel, the payment documentation, that these charges, the Mann Act charges, could have been proven based on that evidence alone and not anything else about racketeering or sex trafficking?
Well, I think that goes, I don't agree with that. I think that, as we argued in the papers, the government didn't really show that the purpose of the travel was to have sex for money, and that in fact all the testimony and a lot of the other evidence showed that the men were being paid for their time. But even if we were wrong about that one, we have a number of the other arguments that you mentioned that really aren't undermined by those records. So for instance, one of our main arguments is that this statute, which used to be called the White Slave Traffic Act, it has this long history, but even with this long history, it's never been applied to a case like this. The term prostitution in a lot of states doesn't include this conduct, even if someone's being paid. If the person making the payment is paying essentially to observe other people having sex, that's not prostitution. So we've got the First Amendment argument, as you mentioned, and the new trial argument. So
declared, it's something that has to be demonstrated over time, and even then, acceptance isn't guaranteed. Some people will never accept it. Others will move on quickly. Most will linger somewhere in between, watching cautiously, waiting for signs that confirm whatever they already believe. What often gets lost in moments like this is how unresolved everything still is. Official confirmation creates the illusion of closure, but closure is personal. It can't be mandated. It can't be scheduled. It arrives unevenly, if at all. The sudden turn also reflects something broader about culture, how quickly attention shifts, how easily outrage coexists with fascination, how stories like this become mirrors for larger conversations about power, privilege, and consequence. People aren't just reacting to a release, they're reacting to what it represents, to what it reminds them of, to what it suggests about the world they live in. The system moved on, the paperwork is done, but society doesn't move on that cleanly. It drags its questions along, refusing to let them be buried by procedure. There's also the reality that freedom doesn't simplify life, it complicates it. It removes one set of restrictions and replaces them with another. Physical confinement ends, but social confinement begins. This wasn't a triumphant moment. It wasn't a tragic one either. It was ambiguous, and ambiguity makes people restless. They want certainty. They want a clear message. They want to know how to feel. But this sudden turn doesn't tell anyone how to feel. It just demands that they feel something. The world will keep watching, not because it's healthy, not because it's fair, but because unresolved stories have gravity. They pull attention back whether people want it or not. And now that the release is confirmed, there's no pausing it again. The story is back in motion. The scrutiny is active. The expectations are loaded. A life has taken a sudden turn, but the road ahead is anything but straight. The door opened, the walls fell away, and what waits outside is louder, harsher, and far less predictable than anything left behind. This moment didn't end the conversation. It restarted it.